Hello, readers of Every Word, and welcome to Every Word 365. I'm your host, Christina Rios-Madsen, and today we are reading Romans 9 through 11. It hurts to see someone reject the gospel. It hurts even more when that someone is part of your family. But it hurts most when that someone who rejects the gospel prides himself or herself on being religious. And that is from today's Daily Walk. Is that the case for any of you? It certainly has been for me. And I used to just be quiet about my faith because I didn't want to make a loved one or me feel uncomfortable. But not anymore. Now I've become that person that will share my faith even if I know those around me disagree. It hasn't been easy, but I believe it's all been a part of God's process of teaching me not to be a people pleaser, which I am naturally. So is anyone else out there with me? Can I hear from the people pleasers? One of my favorite sayings is, I'm a recovering people pleaser. Is that okay? So here are the verses that jumped out to me in today's reading. But again, I always want to know what jumps out to you, and it's very different, and it's great for others to hear what jumped out to everyone else because we can all learn from each other's nuggets. Romans 9:16, so it is God who decides to show mercy. We can neither choose it nor work for it. Again, making sure that it is not about works when it comes to true faith. In the same way, even though God has the right to show his anger and his power, he is very patient with those on whom his anger falls. We are destined for destruction. He does this to make the riches of his glory shine even brighter on those to whom he shows mercy, who are prepared in advance for glory. And that is Romans 9:22 through 23. What does all this mean? Even though the Gentiles were not trying to follow God's standards, they were made right with God. And it was by faith that this took place. But the people of Israel, who tried so hard to get right with God by keeping the law, never succeeded. Why not? Because they were trying to get right with God by keeping the law instead of by trusting in him. They stumbled over the great rock in their path. And that is Romans 9:30 through 32. Again, the law isn't bad and isn't abolished. It was just fulfilled by Jesus Christ. Romans 10:3, for they don't understand God's way of making people right with himself. Refusing to accept God's way, they cling to their own way of getting right with God by trying to keep the law. In today's society, we could argue the same with going to church. That, hey, I go to church and I'm good. It's not just about going to church. It's about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Romans 10:9, if you openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. One of my biggest takeaways from reading through the Bible is that God is all about our hearts. Nobody else can know truly what's in your heart, but he does. It is the same today, for a few of the people of Israel have remained faithful because of God's grace, his undeserved kindness in choosing them. And since it is through God's kindness, then it is not by their good works. For in that case, God's grace would not be what it really is, free and undeserved. Romans 11:5 through 6, again, shouting that it is not about your works, although you will do good works when you give your life to Christ. Romans 11:33, oh, how great are God's riches and wisdom and knowledge. How impossible it is for us to understand his decisions and his ways. I love that. Sure sounds like the Isaiah 55:8 that we screamed over and over again in the Old Testament. His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. And the Bible literally says it's impossible for us to understand his ways. Here is the connections portions from Got Questions regarding the book of Romans. Paul uses several Old Testament people and events as illustrations of the glorious truths in the book of Romans. Abraham believed, and righteousness was imputed to him by his faith, not by his works. In Romans 4:6 through 9, Paul refers to David, who reiterated the same truth. Blessed are they whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man whose sin the Lord will never count against him. Paul uses Adam to explain to the Romans the doctrine of inherited sin and uses the story of Sarah and Isaac, the child of promise, to illustrate the principle of Christians being the children of the promise of the divine grace of God through Christ. In chapters 9 through 11, Paul recounts the history of the nation of Israel and declares that God has not completely and finally rejected Israel. That's Romans 11 through 12, but has allowed them to stumble only until the full number of the Gentiles will be brought to salvation. That's what this is all about, is growing the kingdom of God. And again, that's from Got Questions, and I'll include a link in the podcast description. Tomorrow is Romans 12 through 16. Happy reading. This episode is made possible in part by Arkansas Filter. Arkansas Filter has been serving the state of Arkansas for over 40 years. They sell and service a full suite of commercial, industrial, and residential filters. They are also one of the largest suppliers of UV lights, Gates belts, and HVAC chemicals and cleaners. They partner with HVAC and engineering firms to provide a variety of services and pride themselves on customer service, both during and after the sale. You can find more information at arkansasfilter.net, and of course, we've included a link in the podcast description.